Hello everybody. I'm Kurt Greenbaum, your instructor, and I'm here with Paula Crews, who I'll just mention is also my boss. I'm not going to do any introduction in this video because in your class materials you've seen the material that I put there about her. And I also know that many of you have sent in questions, so we're just going to dive in with those right away. And I'll start first by reminding that the context of this course is that it's called the Business of Communications. And so I'm trying to make sure that we frame the whole conversation around how are people making money in their various communications organizations. They're businesses that are in the business of communications, whether they're news organizations or marketing organizations. So, but let's start with a really simple question. What does marketing and communications mean to you, Paula?
To me, it means
what's its purpose?
What its purpose?
Yeah.
So, interestingly enough, I think what it does is it means that we need to find the right audiences for the business that we're in. And so for our university, it's obviously the students that we're trying to attract to our programs. And interestingly enough, over the years, as we've talked about marketing, it's become more measurable. It's not just what your consumers are saying about you, it should drive some kind of action. And in many cases, that's revenue or sales. So
one of our students has joined us. Are you on the phone, Kelly? She may just be listening in. So,
okay.
But one of our students is on the call right now. So I'm going to call up my chat window too. So if you're in a position to chat with me, Kelly, and you have any questions during the call, feel free. So in that context, that's what marketing and communications means. I also happen to know that you started out your career as an accountant and you transitioned into marketing and communications. Can you talk a little bit about how and why you made that transition?
Sure. So I had a very atypical path to where I'm at today. So I did not study marketing per se as a concentration. So I started out as an accountant and in fact an auditor at Anheuser-Busch companies here in St. Louis. And I'm a graduate of Olin. So I came out of the BSBA program and spent many years in an accounting function and then went back to got my master's and grew into like a finance function. So I eventually ended up as a CFO of a subsidiary, became very involved in understanding strategic planning, business decisions, vision for where the subsidiary was going and how it supported the vision of the overall company, Anheuser-Busch. And as part of that, became very involved in business development and marketing. And at the time, we had a succession planning for the leader of our marketing team. That person was going to be planning their retirement. So I moved over to marketing in that role. But one of the really interesting things, I was reflecting on this because data analytics has become such a topic in the world. And so that background has really helped me understand how important it is to be able to tell the story of marketing through analytics and business insights. Like what kind of impact are we having on the business that we're trying to support? And so I sort of ended up with a quick shift in my career, and I spent the majority of the rest of my career in marketing before, and then I went into advertising agency world and then ended up coming back home to Olin. But with all that, it's given me this ability to really perform data analytics and have business insights without having spent a lot of time in an official data analytics course. So.
Can you give us an example of what you mean by that when you say perform data analytics? Give us a concrete example of what that looks like in your world.
Sure. So we made a strategic decision, almost 3 years ago, we had very disparate CRM systems here at Olin. And so
what does that mean?
Customer relationship management system. So we were using those systems to do some very key functions. So say, for example, applications. So we had students applying to master's programs. And then we had a business development team that wanted to track relationships and how we were growing our business relationships. And at the time, we were really struggling. We just didn't have enough data to make strategic business decisions. So I raised my hand to lead that CRM implementation because I knew we would be able to analyze the impact marketing and communication would have on all of those relationships. So here's a couple examples of what we're doing. So we are able in our to track how every person who's interacting with us, say from an application standpoint, and before they apply, they come into the system, they're a contact, the recruitment team is working them as prospects to bring them down, the funnel we always talk about. And so we're able to tell how those contacts first enter the system. And it helps us decide how we invest our marketing dollars. So we know if, for example, you click on one of our digital marketing ads and you come into the system, if that's the first time we've ever interacted with you, we know that marketing spend brought that person into the system. So that's a data analysis we perform. So how do you get into the system? How many engagements does it take? And what do those engagements cost? And so at the end of the day, we can find out what does it cost to get a prospect into the system.
And
that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a really big change that you've observed, I assume, over the course of your career as a marketer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, in terms of having that level of detail and the ability to track people at that level of that level of detail.
Right. So an example would be in my Anheuser-Busch days. I was thinking back about 25 years ago. How did we market? And so it was mass media, it was, outdoor billboards and TV spots, the Super Bowl spots that people remember through the years. And of course, retail signage and print ads. We bought a lot of print ads and magazines that you would see for Bud Light and Budweiser and so forth. And so we always did this mass media marketing, and we never really could understand what is it bringing in. And so how can you track it? And, it's almost been a little bit challenging for the traditional methods now, because since digital has come on, it's raised the expectation of trying to understand what do the traditional methods still do for us. Because interestingly that, everybody had this, probably about 10 years ago, everybody had this theory that print was going to go away and we weren't going to buy print ads anymore. We were going to pour all of our money into digital. And the fact is, different consumers are in different places, and it's a mix. So you have to really perform a mix, and each channel might serve a different purpose. So one might be actually bringing a prospect in, and one might be brand awareness. And it's hard to understand what a billboard might do for you, but it doesn't mean it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
So
this may be a rudimentary question, but what do you mean by brand awareness?
So brand awareness would be just getting you out in front of the brand, getting you out in front of the consumer. So an example might be you're driving down the highway and you see a billboard that's for a certain vehicle. And there's no way to measure the fact that I'm like, well, that's kind of a good looking vehicle, and I might be interested in that. And then, I get online and you serve up a digital ad, and I click through and I go to the website and I start to look at the vehicle. We often find that billboard might have just raised a brand awareness where you've gone out and you've done a search for that, but it doesn't necessarily get the credit. So we just put ourselves in front of the consumer just as a brand in that industry. Mm-hmm. So for us here at Olin, oftentimes we'll buy print ads. In fact, every year we buy a series in The Economist. And it's really just to raise brand awareness amongst people who are reading that publication, who are often influencers in the industry, to say, have you thought about Olin? Or, wow, there's some interesting things going on at the business school. Maybe I should look at the research they're working on. So it's sort of that first point of we're here.
Yeah. I mean, another tangible example could be some of these Budweiser ads that you see running on the Super Bowl every year. Some of them are very much about go buy beer.
Right.
And some of those ads with the Clydesdales are nothing about buying beer. They're really not, right? Is that, am I correct about that?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And interestingly enough, while I was working at Anheuser-Busch and I was leading the marketing team, I did not actually work at on the beer side. I worked on what was called the environmental awareness and packaging side. And my job was to raise the company's, our consumers' opinion of the company through environmental awareness. And so social responsibility was really heavy, but what people didn't know is Anheuser-Busch in its inception was the #1 recycler of aluminum cans. And so my job was to then put us in the consumer's mindset. That's a hard message to get across. So what we did is we partnered with Major League Baseball, the NFL, NASCAR, and places where our beer brand was already out there, but we could tell the story of recycling along with it. And so we blanket the tailgate sections with recycling bins and giveaways and so forth. So we were so our ads that we were running also for brand aware around recycling weren't necessarily selling beer, but through a holistic brand approach, you're thinking there's a halo effect that if you're standing in front of a cooler and you have to make a decision and you remember, wow, they really support the environment and that's important to you, then you would choose the beer over another competitor.
And that's the brand awareness idea. Okay.
Yes.
So, here's a question. Kelly has just texted in a question. So let's get to her right away. Mm-hmm. And since you're not on audio, Kelly, I can't introduce you any more than to say, there's Kelly.
Hi, Kelly.
How do you feel about consumer concerns regarding privacy issues around data analytics gathered from sites such as Google? And we can, we don't have to just focus on Google. We can talk about the whole issue of digital marketing.
Right. It's interesting. And I think it's one of the things that is really interesting that's changed in the consumer minds. I think probably more of a younger consumer mind that has grown up around being very open and probably less private than maybe somebody from my age group. So it is very interesting what people will share and do on social and the kind of information that we can get from Google. And so like any brand, we do a lot of digital purchasing and we geo-target and we demographic target. And I think that when you're in those spaces, it's sort of an expectation, but I do obviously believe that that all of those companies have the absolute responsibility to data privacy. And so how they use that's a big role for them. But I think that, and we often, like anyone, also give people ways to opt out. And also I think now with the ad blocker that Google uses where you can block the ads, those are important things to have in there. But I don't see that challenge going away because it's their business model. It's sort of how they make money. But I feel like they have a huge responsibility to that. And obviously we protect the privacy of all the folks that we interact with. And so,
there's an element of transparency too, right? In terms of what information you're gathering, how you're using it.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. So even like, for example, it's kind of a little bit in the weeds, but even inside of our CRM system, when you raise your hand to interact with somebody in our organization, what we've done is we've used technology to affiliate you with a department per se, or a function inside of Olin. And we have very stringent privacy policies that no one in our organization can contact you or use any information in a way that is not part of their job. And so that's, so we're pulling people in from digital advertising, but we are very stringent about how our organization approaches those folks and how they use that information.
Sure. I'm going to go back to something you talked about earlier, and because it relates to a question that another student emailed in. You talked about how people thought print was going to be going away, but in the earlier part of your career, that was a channel that you relied on pretty heavily. Her question is it frustrating to you to see print advertising and that kind of material sort of sliding down and getting diminished?
I think it still has its role, so we're talking about it as, we're talking about the brand awareness, and when you're at the way top part of the funnel and people don't know who you are, it's sometimes the way you're just going to need to get out there. And so I think it still has a role. I think it's obviously the role's decreased over time. But we certainly still consider it. Not frustrating at all. I think the challenge, the biggest challenge is not so much print going away, because we're still doing print, and we still actually do what we call out of home. We do station domination, the metro stations. That's a way that we raise brand awareness for WashU Olin.
Can we elaborate a little bit on that? You're
Sure.
talking about the idea that in a couple of metro stations in Washington, D.C., and in San Francisco, I believe we did.
Atlanta.
Yeah, we basically took over all the display advertising in those metro stops.
Yes.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, so out of home can be, like you're driving down the highway, you see a billboard, but this is a very interesting option for out of home. So you enter the metro station, and I think we're in Tyson Station right now in DC, and I think it's 72 pieces of art. So 72 basic signs. And so what we do is we take the consumer through an experience. So when they first hit the metro station and you're kind of in a hurry, that's where we think about high level. Who's Olin, and what do we stand for? And then is our objective for this entire station domination buy is to increase the number of applications coming into our full-time MBA program. And then as you move through the fare gates, which is, still has very general brand awareness, you walk into a world that you can see that is very heavily branded, very consistent messaging. Our brand is a very sort of heavy font and red. And so it's kind of very, it stops you. But inside that whole part of the station, we're selling you on the full-time MBA program. And then as you move to the platform, there's more signage out there, and that's about a call to action. How do we get you to register for an event or visit our website? So that's how we're using what was seen as very traditional. We have used lots of outdoor billboards. I think that those forms will still continue to evolve. There's talk, and I'm sure it's out there. We haven't done it, but there's talk about digital, there's digital billboards out there, but there's talk about changing it to almost like Google so that you could bid on it, and the higher bidder gets the ability to, to take over the digital signage in more space. So I think we'll continue to see some traditional forms sort of evolve with technology. And I think print in the right spaces and the right readership is important for raising brand awareness. So
okay.
What I do is and it doesn't always happen, but we try to measure that, going back to the metrics discussion earlier, we try to measure that by, do we see a lift in organic search? So when we run print ads, what do
we mean by organic search?
So do we see, we'll use Google Analytics. And so that's giving us information about people who are coming to our site and how do they get there. So we can tell who's coming there through paid, so who clicks through on an ad, and who comes through a non-paid where they've searched us and then clicked through. So they've keyed in top MBA program, or hopefully they see our station domination and they key in WashU Olin full-time MBA program, and then they click through to the website. So we'll tip to see if there's an organic search lift during those times, and sometimes we see it and sometimes we don't. So
got it. Okay. I'm going to switch gears back to a little bit about your career, but in the context of kind of the different business organizations that you've worked in.
Sure.
Can you contrast for me the difference between working in a marketing department in a corporation like Anheuser-Busch, and how is that different, or how is it the same as working in an agency when you were working in Paradowski?
Sure. So working inside the corporate world, we obviously had teams of folks that worked together, and we contracted with agencies. So where I eventually went to work, right? So we were sitting on sort of this side of the desk. And the work was probably really much more focused on strategy and working with an agency to make sure what they were delivering from a creative standpoint, from a marketing plan, which might include all the tactics, the spend, and so forth, and the metrics. They were delivering a lot of that to us, but we were working from a more strategic place. I mean, we obviously had a lot of tactical work to do ourselves, but we were, living the brand and having agencies, and we were always trying to find the best partner to work with that could bring the brand to life, who brought the new ideas to the table, who was the most efficient on spending, who could help us measure, the best and so forth. And so, and we worked across a lot with other marketers in our organization. So when I was working on the recycling side and the environmental side, I was working with the Budweiser director of Budweiser brand team, understanding that we were supporting the brand in a holistic view. So really working with a lot of marketers and a lot of agencies. And then when I went to the advertising agency, I was suddenly on the other side of the desk and delivering on how do we bring the best creative minds together in an agency to build the best brand strategy for our clients, the best marketing ideas, and a ton of execution. So, a lot of we did things like elevator wraps and, all kinds of coming up with different tactics, packaging development in terms of how can we package a beer to stand out on a retail shelf. So a lot of execution. But again, working with a lot of marketers. So most people in the room together with marketers. So you sort of had this same lingo, same understanding of where we were all headed, and probably came to consensus of opinion in a probably, sort of uniform way, because we were all marketers and because that's one of the things, interesting enough, as we talk about all the channels that have changed, one of the things is the core theory of marketing has not changed. You need to focus on the audience and so forth. So we were all on that same basis. Coming to the university has been a enormous change for me and I've been here 9 years now, but when I got here, I was no longer really working across the desk from marketers. So I was really working across the desk more from faculty or from a departmental chair or a department head. It was less about, and so I went into the room kind of under the assumption we were all on the same page. And so that we figured, and I've had to adjust my communications, and I think at the university, the departments have been, when I got here, there wasn't really a unified brand strategy where there was a house of brands. And so the conversation went something like, when I went into the room, we need this, and we need this, and we need this, and we need it to be blue, and we need it to say this. And so it was kind of we had to change the interactions and the communications. Let's back up. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to get done? What are the objectives? And let us develop the pieces and the communication strategy that best supports that. So that's been a shift for us. And I think it's been well received. But because those folks weren't marketers, they really didn't come from the same place that my team was coming.
Sure. So I want to dig down into that a little bit more. The idea is, in some sense, we're a hybrid here in your marketing and communications department, right?
Yes.
We're sort of in that corporate communications or corporate marketing environment because we are fundamentally a corporation, a nonprofit corporation, but at the same time, we're working in service of these departments around the business school that have messages they need to get out, events they need to sponsor, students they need to recruit, all of that sort of stuff that's going on. So what were some of you talked about a disconnect, for example, where they would say, this is what we need. We need to market this event, and we need to do a postcard, and we need to have a website, and we need it to be this color and all that sort of thing. So fundamentally, you're saying that it was sort of a change in mindset where you said, look, we have some strategic expertise in this that we can bring. How was that received? I mean, I know now how it's been, but at the time, what was that like?
It was challenging, because I think, and I don't mean this in a disrespect, or it's not even just here, but I think a lot of times the general population might feel like could be really good marketers because they're consumers. I mean, you're out buying stuff every day, right? So you're thinking, I wouldn't market it that way. I'd market it this way. And so I think there was some of that going on. And I think we had to balance it. We couldn't run into it. We had to look for some opportunities to help somebody. So we might say, think about this, or, what are you trying to get done? And maybe we would have to give them a little bit of what they felt like they needed, but then balance it with some new thoughts. And so you're right, we're a hybrid. So our department is responsible for brand strategy, marketing plans. And then on almost like on the agency side, we're really responsible for a lot of the execution. Like, what are the tactics we're going to do? How are we going to measure it? We don't outsource that type of work. And so we had to move from this like order taker mentality to strategic thinker mentality. And we had to be realistic that we had to do that in steps. So we obviously would look for, like anybody, you're going to look for people in the organization that are open to the idea. And then, they would say, hey, we really worked on marketing with this, and it really took us to a different place. Or we've done some things where we've measured, let's do an experiment. Let us experiment. We'll pay for it. We'll do the experiment. And if it works, we've done some of that, and it's driven applications up. So you have to kind of have some wins and also help and also deliver on what makes them comfortable. So when I got here, we had 50-page view books. So you pick up this big view book about the full-time MBA, and they were really uncomfortable with going with the trifold. So we took it down to 12 pages, and then we went to 8, and now we have a double-sided sell sheet. And we also had to use, there's a ton of data out there, right, on consumer research. So we also had to use a lot of that to influence them. And being in a university, research is very important to us. Data is very important to us. Obviously, we're a very rigorous business school. So using some of that evidence along with our wins, I think has helped shift.
So you didn't go from a 50-page view book to a 2-sided sell sheet just
right.
because you wanted to save paper. Why did you do
right.
that?
Right. So clearly, to the question before about print, it still has its place. But clearly, consumers were not using it in that way. And we knew that from our recruitment team. So our recruitment team is AKA sales team. So we would sit down with and each year we've gotten very much closer and better at planning out strategy and understanding. So we would say, how do you see people using the view books? And the hardcore truth was they saw a lot of people tossing them to the side. And so here we're spending all this money on a 50-page book. Now but we weren't ready to go to zero because the consumer still wants to walk away with something, and we still want to be in your bag that you're carrying away to look up WashU Olin Business School. So, but we knew at the time that people weren't consuming the whole 50 pages. And then what we also brought to the table is this idea of, let's take what you're trying to sell and let's build a funnel of how you're trying to move somebody down the funnel. And what's the most important communication point at each point? You're trying to tell it all to them, at the first point where you're just trying to get them to know, like, we're WashU and we have a business school, that we're a highly ranked business school. We're trying to tell them everything about St. Louis. We're trying to tell them, how many trips they'll take. And so finally, talking through with the recruitment team and the department heads, they were like, you're right. Consumers, even more so today, have a very short attention span, and you can't hit them with 50 points. So they gained, I guess the best thing to say is they gained comfort that we were going to cover it all the way down the funnel, but not all at once, and maybe using a different channel.
So this speaks to a lot of things that we've already talked about here. Strategy.
Right.
It talks about, so we're not getting rid of all the content. We're just being strategic about when we tell you different pieces of content. And we think about when it's going to be important for you to know this piece of information versus this piece of information.
Right.
You talk about knowing who the consumer is, and so that's another part of the strategy. So is this piece of information relevant to this consumer at this time? So, and then we've got all these other channels that we can use to deliver the same content. We've been for many years doing email marketing at the business school. We've just sort of kicked it up a notch in the last couple of years, but so we've got ways to in using email marketing to deliver that content in strategic and timely ways as well, and drive them to this thing we have called a website where all of it's there. Right.
Yeah, on the email side, as you were saying, we've kicked it up a notch, and we've even been very strategic about what we call our email journeys. And so we're using our CRM system, and based on how we interact with folks and the decisions that they make, we take them down a journey. And what we try to do is we try to based upon where they're at in their journey, given the share of mind they're going to give us, we try to either hit them with a brand message, like this is why you should pick Olin, or we try to speak to them specifically about a program element. And we're really looking into the future to start to understand as we learn more about our consumer, maybe what we do, and this is one of the trends I think we're going to start seeing, it's already happening, but this personalization. So the more we know about that consumer, can we send them specifically a email about our Masters of Science in Finance, if we know they want to be a finance person. So we're going to continue to refine that, but those journeys have really been a step up for us. It was interesting. Somebody would apply in like October, and you might get a call from a recruiter, and the recruiters were sending individual emails, and some were, really long with everything, and some were singular in a point. And so we've, through technology, been able to systematically have drip campaigns while still allowing the consumer to say, I don't want to be part of your campaign anymore, or I'm more interested in this. Mm-hmm. It's moving. I mean, we're, a business school. And so there's obviously brands that are way further into the personalization, but I see that's where we're headed.
Yeah. And you used a phrase there called drip campaign, meaning we're just dripping out the information at the right time, in the right format, to the right person. Drip, drip, drip. And so you might drip something now, and in a week, drip something else until the consumer says, you know what, I think I've heard enough, I'm out. Or they might click on something in one of your emails, and that triggers something in our system that says, oh, wait, they're interested in this. Let's drip them some information about that now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so, so they're having somewhat of a choice as to how they're interacting with us, which is really important to the consumers today. And, and the other really key thing about the email journeys that we've done, that we try to do in all of our marketing, whether it's on a ad, whether it's on a digital ad campaign, but a single thought, a single message. And so, think about the view book, it was probably 20 messages. So through the email campaign, the sell sheet, just reminding you who we are, but then, going to our website, taking an action, you end up in our system, we begin the drip campaign, and we just hit you with certain singular messages that you can recall. So one email might be about one very clear element about our full-time MBA program.
Great. Okay. Another shift gears here. Tia, one of our students, Tia Latisse, was interested to know what advice you would give to your former self about what you're doing now. If if at the beginning of your career, what do you wish you'd known, I guess?
That's interesting. I guess I think one of the things that coming from like an accounting background and a finance background, I went to a high school that was very heavy math and science. So I really actually applied here at WashU, and I went into the engineering school. So, it's been a total shift. But it's kind of like when you wake up and you're like, this is not my thing. This is just, it's not a feeling. So I've landed, I think, where I belong. But what's interesting is this opinion of marketing when I was at the business school of, oh, that's for the creative types and I'm not creative. And that's not true. Everybody's creative, and I find sometimes when we're in brainstorms, and this really used to happen at the agency a lot, where, your roles are very clear. Like you're the graphic designer, or you're the art director. So your job is to make the visuals beautiful, and you're the writer. So your job is to write. And, I felt like I was the account director. My job was to manage it, make sure things get done and project management. But in that agency world and throughout my career, I've learned to express my voice, like we all, are say, okay, let's go back to the consumer. It's not a personal decision. Let's go back to the consumer. And everybody, I think, has creative talent to bring to the table, no matter what role you play, and come up with new ideas. I've seen, an account director throw out you may not like to hear this, Kurt, but throw out a really snazzy headline, and you're like, that's it. I mean, the writers have 10 of them on a piece of white paper. So I would have.
No, actually, it happened in the magazine. One of our designers is the one who came up with the best headline for the cover story. So
right, and you picture those people doing all the visual work, right?
Right.
So I think I would have told my younger self, make sure that I exercise my creative muscle, not wait to so late in my career. And so our creative director, maybe she's just saying it because she works for me, but our creative director will often say to me, you have a creative eye. You can really pick up on something. So I would say, work on your creative muscle and don't box yourself in. If you're not coming from either the written side or the visual side, don't box yourself in. So.
Well, and yeah, I think it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because the definition of being creative may not be what you thought it was back then. Mm-hmm. I mean, I look at some of the professors here in the business school in our marketing department who are working with big data, and that's creative in a different way. That's looking at what can we do with this data set, mm-hmm. and how can we make it stand up and dance for us and give mm-hmm. us insights into what consumers want and need. So I'm going to transition to that though and say that's another huge change in the course of your career, this use of data. And I wonder if you can talk about examples of where you've seen it done really well.
Yes. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, can I have two things to tell my younger self? Because the second would have been, really know that you're going to bring a lot of value to the table with this very analytical kind of background. Because, when I applied for the job here at Olin, and I talked to you a little about it, Kurt, that I was sort of kind of thinking like, oh, my resume reads like was an accountant, I was a finance person. I was going up against a really high-ranking brand person from Pepsi, And so do I have the chops to do that? And I was like, of course I do. Who doesn't want to, years ago, you would say, oh, the marketing department, they're really just like a cost center. They're spending all kinds of money. They don't really know if it works. And, we've talked before about which 50% is not working in the marketing budget. And so I probably would have told myself, like, really make sure you shine there. And we are trying to do that here at Olin. As in a key part of our new brand launch that we had 2 years ago, is that we are producing an academy of leaders that make better decisions because of data and values. So together, it's a big and, it's capital A and D. And so what we try to do here specifically, I think that has worked really well, is that, using the CRM data to understand how people move down the path. I'm constantly pie charting the marketing spend to understand, does the marketing spend stand up against our strategic plan and what objectives? So one of our objectives is to raise the number of our full-time applications and to diversify into different countries as well as different cities domestically. And so constantly analyzing how we're spending. And then what we do is we put that up against who's clicking through on the ads, who's starting applications, who's filling out applications, who enrolls, who graduates and becomes an alum. So we're really taking a lot of different, and that's one of the challenges with data, right? It sits in lots of different places, and how do you bring it all together for business insights? So we're looking at it that way. We are starting, I think, to become more, which is interesting for a university for me to say this, but we are starting to be stricter on, we need to perform research. We need to perform market research, so if we want to launch a new program, develop a concept, let's put it out there. Let's not only test the concept, let's test price elasticity. What are people willing to pay for a program? That's a big shift in our industry. So, looking at that, and then, and then we bring different companies to come in and talk to us about different data that they can pull in terms of, what are consumers thinking, feeling, doing, where do they go to get their information? So it's a lot more data driven than it was before, which was much more instinctual. I've been in marketing for a long time, or I'm an agency lead and I've been doing this for a long time, and my gut tells me this is what you need to do. There's still some of that, but we typically try to find the data in all of that. So,
and that's another major change in this technological age that we live in now. There's a lot more data available to us.
Right.
And we know, for example, that research from a member of our faculty on a mammoth database of grocery store consumer purchases tells him that customers who come in to buy beer tend to also buy diapers.
Right.
And so based on analyzing an enormous data set, that tracks people's purchases when they come into the grocery store. He has millions and millions of lines of data from a variety of consumers. It yields these kinds of insights, which then he can turn around and say, well, maybe that then means we should offer, coupons for diapers,
Right.
for people that we know happen to buy a lot of beer, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's not what you went to school to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you can do. And so years ago, when I was at Anheuser-Busch, we had a corporate library, and so data then meant like all the things that came across basically the scanner on the grocery store, and we thought that was like really cutting edge. But we didn't have it digitally. We had to go down to the library and pull out the big 3-ring binders and say, what does beer sales look like in Atlanta? And what can we do, and then try to parse together what consumers in Atlanta are like. And so how do we change our messaging? And data is it's almost maybe to the point, I think one of the things that our faculty members talk about in data analytics, it's almost so overwhelming that you have to kind of really, and that's what we're trying to do here is teach. We're not teaching our students how to take a big database and run computational analysis. We teach them a bit, right? But it's about how do you take all that data, bring it together, and it might be from a variety of sources, and make some key business insights, which is really what we try to do here in the department. Maybe at a little bit smaller level, but we look at a lot of, and competitive data years ago was, you went out and you stalked your competitor just to understand what they were doing. Like from a beer standpoint, you went to the grocery store and you said, oh, they're sponsoring this, or they're building displays this way. And now there's so much you can find out about your competitor just online and just from data reports. I mean, we have industry, GMAC, so the Graduate Management Association, our industry produces a ton of information on our competitors and how they're doing. And so there's just a lot more data out there that, and we used to do competitive analysis where, we would build, data models in Excel over years. And so it was and now there's industry participants that do it.
So Kelly was typed in a question for you. Did you teach yourself data analytics? And maybe take that question wherever you think it needs to go.
Right. So no, I did not. I grew up in a organization, Anheuser-Busch, that really was very data focused at the time with what we had. Data was very important. And so I grew up, I think, really growing to respect numbers by doing things like building an industry model to understand what recycling rates might do to us in the future in terms of how much metal we could buy. And so it was really sort of more data analysis of business decisions. I spent a lot of my career supporting strategic planning. So I built five-year planning models and ran scenarios and, did things like, what are the things that influence recycling rates? Let's build a model and run an R-square to see if something influences recycling rates. And so I did a lot of that work that wasn't really focused on marketing, but it was really more focused on business decisions and helping leaders make the best business decision they could, running scenarios around it. Anheuser-Busch was a company that was very planful. So what if this happens? What if the currency goes down by 50% and we're selling beer in Brazil? So did a lot of that. And I also, when I was in the corporate finance world, I did a lot of watching the markets. So I did a lot of long-term debt financing and stock repurchase. And so just watching markets. So we spent a lot of time analyzing financial markets and where we thought they were going to go. And so I think I just built up my muscle on understanding numbers and how to look at them and say, what's the scenarios around this that could be different? What could change, in this that we need to understand so that we can react quickly. So I did a lot of that. I think it wasn't really data analytics, but it is now, and we built a lot of models where we began to store data over the course of years that we could go out and do trend analysis. So again, I think now it's much more sophisticated in terms of using technology to do it. But I think going through the fact that we had to build a lot of that in Excel and do that really, it was ground up, like we had. So So I think, so I think I was in an organization that really respected it. So they put us through a lot of training and understanding. And it was very important to have it right, because it was typically a driver of the overall, every unit came to the strategy committee at Anheuser-Busch, and it was obviously very important to have it right because major decisions were made on it. So.
Yeah, okay. Another question from a student, Panna Garardini. Social media. How are we using social media here? Maybe I'm going to spin off of her question a little bit and have you speak more about the subject writ large in the context of marketing and communications, but maybe you can tie it into some specific examples.
Sure. So social media. Okay. So interestingly enough, when social media started to hit, I was obviously working at Anheuser-Busch, and as marketers, we were all like, oh my gosh, now people have a platform to talk about you. Marketing was always sort of this one way, right? I'm going to keep telling you about my brand. And of course you told your friends, or of course, we used to always say, like, when somebody's standing in a bar and holding a beer, you're hoping that they're turning the label around because it says, I'm a Bud Light drinker, I'm a Budweiser drinker. So, and so people were influencing each other, but now there's this platform where the brand has no control over what people say about you. So as marketers, branders, I think we were all, a little bit afraid, like what's going to happen here. And then you learn to capitalize on it. I mean, and so you have to present yourself in the best light, and, and then you have to be able to handle when people say things about your brand. I mean, you have to, how are you going to handle that? And so, and I think that as I left AB and moved through the agency, there was this thing too of, we're going to hire people to handle our social media. We're going to hire a professional agency, which I used to always think, that makes me uncomfortable. Maybe you can hire an agency to help you understand strategy and maybe help you develop some content, but you got to have a voice, and it's got to be real and authentic. And so, that was kind of another shift in social media. And then when I got here, and probably as someone at the agency, one of the frustrating things about social media is that people who aren't in the marketing industry, and probably like say leaders in any organization, think it's free. It's a free tactic. It's earned, like, you're trying to place an article years ago in the paper, right? It doesn't cost you anything. It's this idea. And so when I first got here, it was the dawn of kind of, we got to be on Facebook. I mean, just put something up. Like, okay, gosh, now here comes Twitter. Okay, we got to put something up on Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat. And this is this feeling of it's never going to stop, and I think it's never going to stop. There's going to be other channels. But I think it's a really strong form of how we get out there, because they're interacting with us in a non-forced way. They're choosing to interact with us. And so, and I want to hear what the consumers think about us. So we got a lot more thoughtful, and you obviously know, because you're part of this, but we got a lot more thoughtful about how do we want to speak about our brand in that space? And how do we want to balance it so it's not, people want to also abuse it? Like, get on there and tell them we've got a course coming, they got to sign up, you got to balance it. You've got to, I think has challenged marketers over the years, because it's not a one-line hit, right? It's something that you're delivering some kind of valuable content or something. It might be short form, long form, that people want to interact with. And so it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of thought. I think it's also, and we have a really strong team here that has thought very strategically about how do we use each channel? How are consumers different in each channel? What we might put on Facebook may not fit on Twitter. And so there's a lot of thought around that. Keeping it interesting and deciding how we're going to react to feedback or thoughts on social media. I think, and it's also, I think it's also really fed the disruption in industries, because years ago we were Anheuser-Busch, we had hundreds of millions of dollars that we poured into advertising. And if you wanted to start a small brewery, there's some companies that have started with very little marketing dollars who are pushing that through social media. They're getting word of mouth through it. Maybe they're using, YouTube years ago used to be like a library for our videos, and now it's actually a channel. And so I think, the internet, the technology development, and social media specifically has helped, smaller companies become disruptors to industries. And so it's not something that we shouldn't be thinking about. So.
We've got about 10 minutes. Kimberly, another student, Kimberly Langley, has a couple of three questions here, but I think the most interesting one is, can you give us an example of a campaign that you were involved in that didn't work out the way you had hoped? And what did you learn from that?
Interesting. Okay. So I was actually looking back through some old, and when we were at the agency, we were called upon to, Bud Select was coming out, Select 55, sorry. So, we were competing with what was out there, Miller 64. And so, it was after Mick Ultra had been released. It was like, we need a beer for somebody who wants to drink less calorie, less alcohol. They probably tend to be really active. And the research showed that it was probably a beer that would appeal more to women than to men. And so we had done a ton of consumer research with the agency, with Anheuser-Busch. And at the time, they were coming up with the brand launch. And we were working with what at the time was the innovation department. And so think about this department inside a big corporate machine that's job is to be very creative and be very innovative and come up with new brand products, new packaging, new advertising, everything, that could change the industry. And so they called us and they said, we want to think, and gaming it's obviously gaming's still really hot, but these gaming apps were really growing. And so they said, we want to think about, is there a game or some kind of application that we could come up with? And so we went back to the creative agency. We came up with what we thought was this fabulous idea, and we called it My Select Life. And we built this game, this app, and it was targeted at women. And it was all about entertainment and fun and sharing. And so you could, your friends could join your group, or you could make it much more public. And you built an avatar of what you thought you looked like, and you led My Select Life. So even though you're working or you're going through the drudge of life and the fast-paced life, it was a distraction in that you could build yourself out into this world. You could invite your friends, you could dress your avatar, you could celebrate at the beach, you could take a cruise. And it was almost like, if anybody remembers like the Webkins, of years ago, where you bought these little animals and you built a life form. It was kind of that idea. And so we spent a lot of time, a lot of strategy, and AB spent quite a bit of money on it. And so when we came back to it, we were saying, okay, where's this fit into the marketing plan? And we need to be on retail signs. Like if you walk into, Schnucks here and you see a Select display, we should be really promoting this app. And like anything, there was this discussion about, no, the most important message is it's 55 calories and it has 2% alcohol. And so we were really fighting with space, and we just didn't see the traction we thought we would have. And so, the lesson learned and all that, and we've heard this over and over again about websites even, is like, build it, they'll come. And it's not true. You have to get out there. You have to, get some kind of share of mind to get somebody to interact with you in that way. And I think that's more so even true now with as many messages as we get inundated with. You have to be out there. And it was something that was not being done at that time in the beer industry. It was very, it was very innovative. We just didn't get the right share of the brand or right share of the marketing plan. That was a term of art you just used a minute ago. Share of mind. What does that mean? So, you're getting hit with a lot of messages, and we want to get in there and have something that sticks. And so that, we get a share of your mind or share of what you're thinking about. And we hope that, like from a beer standpoint, you walk into the cooler and you have built up some sort of opinion of a brand. And, we used to talk in the beer industry about battling for share of mind over liquor or vodka. So, when you're starting to think about beer or starting to think about having a cocktail or a drink, we want the share of mind to be more about beer and specifically about, AB products. So we're always kind of chasing that. In the education industry, obviously, when you start to think about, I might want to do something different. So I might want to get a different degree, or I might want to advance my career. we want Olin to be in that share of mind that we can always help you advance your career.
Okay. Does that concept speak at all to that phenomenon that we are all familiar with, where you've watched a commercial on TV,
Yes.
and the next morning you want to tell your friends about it, but you can't remember the company that was advertising?
Yes. And it's happened to me as a marketer. I'm like, oh, I really love that commercial. Yeah, I can't remember the brand. And then I'm thinking, all right, well, maybe it just didn't work as well. And so if you want to think about that, I mean, that is one of the areas, and I wasn't in that area, but we were certainly privy to see the Super Bowl commercials before they hit, you know? And so that is one of the areas, I think, to your point earlier about brand awareness, that AB did a really good job. I mean, you know, the ad poll the next day, the USA Today was the thing that we all, you know, we ran into the office and talk about when print, you know, we ran and like everybody bought USA Today copies and, you know, and did AB get the top 3 spots, including the Clydesdale commercial. But yeah, so do we have share of mind during the game and during halftime for our commercials that people could walk away the next day and be like, yeah, I recall that was a really awesome commercial.
Yeah. This may be our last question because I have a feeling there's not a simple answer to this one. Another from a student, Jalen Burton. I'll just read you what he sent. As an employee of WashU, I am amused about the ads I see across the university on television and on social media involving Washington University. In your experience, what has been the most effective means of marketing and advertising at WashU?
Wow. Okay. It's hard for me to speak from a WashU level, obviously, because I'm not intimately involved with the plans to market the university as a whole. I can say that from our standpoint, I think the most effective ads have been singular in the message, short in the message, and are written for the channel. So for example, when we do a digital media buy, we know through research, interestingly, how consumers, and we get this from our digital agency, you know, you don't want 5 words on the first block of a digital ad, and you need a call to action. So, you know, when we're looking at the channel, we're saying what works best here. Or when we have done outdoor billboards, we know it can never be more than 8 words, because depending upon the speed people are traveling and how many billboards are up, you can never be more than 8 words. You know, maybe 3 words work. And so those are kind of the framework that we build it around. But I think from a messaging standpoint, we always try to stay on brand. So for example, one of our key messages around our full-time MBA program, right? So we wanted to go global. Like, we want to be the most global full-time MBA program. And I think we've gotten there. We are. But, you know, we talk about 3 continents, we talk about 3 continents, world-class faculty, 1 truly global MBA. So the message is very quick. It's singular in thought. We want you to know that we are a global brand. And so I think those have been most effective. And there's always this desire to put in there like lots of other things, but staying point on is one. And then I would also say we've also gotten a little unexpected for our brand. So, you know, we had some work done by Ology, an agency out of Ohio that focuses on higher ed. And, you know, they challenged us to say, for Washington University in St. Louis, you tend to have a very conservative brand. How comfortable are you to push? How do you want to just be distinctive, or do you want to differentiate yourself? And if you want to differentiate yourself, you're going to have to take a little bit of a risk. And so, you know, we push and so part of our brand that I find fascinating, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on, is sort of this tension between values and data, and often the decisions that business leaders have to make. And so some of our print ads reflect that. And the goal of that is to make you stop and go, I don't know what kind of decision I would make about that. That's not an easy answer. And so, you know, like, for example, recently we did something around when the cost of saving the environment cost jobs. And then we said we pause, which made our people here feel really uncomfortable. Because like, no, we don't pause, we make decisions. And it's like, no, we're reflective. We're decision makers who balance data and values. And so I think those have been really effective. And I mean, Kurt, you obviously are involved in a lot of those. Or we did a leadership perspective, and we called it the other F word. And so that made me a little uneasy. So I was like, let's float this to the top and make sure we're understanding this is representative of our brand. Obviously, it was followed on with, clearly the word was related to failure, and how do we help and support students and startups and, you know, corporate innovators to recover from failure, because it's inevitably going to happen when you innovate. So I think pushing the edge a little bit for a school that's been very conservative is serving us well.
That's great. Well, we're at the top of the hour and we're at the end of the time. I just want to give you a chance if there's anything that you really wanted to say that I didn't give you a chance to say. Otherwise, we can close it now.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think, you know, I was kind of just preparing how I felt about my career for this. And it was interesting to me because it was this, and maybe it's not a big aha, but it's like, wow, there's a lot of things that have changed in 20 years. And I thought about, well, what am I expecting for the next 20 years? And I thought, I can't even guess the next year, because the next speed of change is going to could be double, you know? So I thought, as a marketer, and maybe this is true in every industry, but, you know, most people think about, oh, marketing, you do print ads, you do digital ads, you do the same thing every day. Not really so. I think it's challenges us to think constantly, learn constantly, and it's challenged me, and I think many on our team, to step up our technical game. You got to know what you're talking about when you start talking about Google AdWords and data and so forth. So you've really got to step up your technical game. So I think it's almost a blend. Like, I think CMOs nowadays are almost a blend of a CMO and a CIO. So,
all right.
Big change for the future.
Well, thank you very much for taking an hour away. Kelly, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And as I said to you before, the recording of this will be up before I go to bed tonight, and the students will be watching it since they couldn't be here. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.